Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to start out with Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier, part of the Duvalier clan that ruled Haiti for many decades. He was the son of Francis Papa Doc Duvalier. Papa Doc Duvalier ruled Haiti with an iron fist and killed thousands of Haitians, and when he died in 1971, his son Jean-Claude took over, and he used the same feared militia, the Tonton Macoute, to enforce his rule over Haiti. And although he wasn't as brutal as his father, if you crossed him, you would still wind up on the wrong side of a machete from the Tonton Macoute. Here's BBC News to talk about Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier.
He was once the world's youngest president. The man they called Baby Doc was part of a 30-year Haitian dynasty. At the age of 19, Jean-Claude Duvalier took over the presidency upon the death of his father, Francois. But Papa Doc's legacy remained. The junior Duvalier employed the same brutal militia as his father, the Tonton Macoute. This allowed him to rule with an iron fist, suppressing and jailing political opponents. In 1986, mass uprisings eventually forced Jean-Claude Duvalier to flee into exile, paving the way for a new era of stalled democracy, peppered with brief military rule and political turbulence. In 2011, as Haiti recovered from its devastating earthquake, Baby Doc returned, with some words for his opponents.
From the moment I decided to return to Haiti to commemorate this sad anniversary with you in our country, I have been expecting all kinds of prosecution. I would also like to take this opportunity to express once again my profound sadness to my compatriots who believe that they were victims during my governance.
Some welcomed the former leader. Human rights campaigners called for the former president to stand trial. Duvalier did testify before a judge, somewhat nervously, but the case stalled. Former leader was allowed to live in the obscurity of a Port-au-Prince suburb, freely roaming the capital as he pleased until his death. Tom Esselmont, BBC News.
We're going to move on now to Yitzhak Hofi, who died recently at the age of 87. He was an Israeli general who played a key role in the 1973 Yom Kippur War. And a little while after that, he was appointed by Yitzhak Rabin to become the intelligence chief, the head of Mossad from 1974 to 1982. It's a little unusual that the New York Times didn't even do an obit on him. I mean, he was a crucial figure for the Israeli military and the Israeli intelligence. In 1973, he noticed that the Syrians had placed SAM-6 Soviet anti-aircraft missiles right near the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights were vulnerable to a Syrian military assault, and the only thing that kept them away was the Israeli aircraft. And these SAM-6 missiles meant that the Israeli Air Force might not be able to defend the Golan Heights against a Syrian attack. He warned the general staff of that, and they dismissed it, figuring that the Syrians were not ready for an armed attack. What happened was the Syrians had mobilized far more troops than the Israelis had anticipated and were ready to strike at the Golan Heights. They coordinated their attack with an Egyptian assault from the south, and most of the Israeli reserves had not been mobilized by that point. Due to the lack of manpower, the Golan Heights were under serious assault, and it was only a last-minute mobilization that saved them, and that was due to Hofi's warnings that were heeded by Moshe Dayan. Hofi won a lot of respect after that. When he became head of Mossad a little while later, he took on some daring operations, including the rescue of the hostages at the Entebbe airport in 1976, and Operation Opera, the destruction of the Iraqi nuclear reactor at Osirak in 1981. Here's BBC4 Last Word with Matthew Bannister to talk about the career of Yitzhak Hofi, and I personally think they dwell a little too long on the campaign to kill the Black September terrorists who murdered the Israeli Olympians from the 1972 Olympics.
Now, Major General Yitzhak Hofi was the head of the Israeli intelligence service Mossad between 1974 and 1982. Yitzhak Hofi was born in Tel Aviv. He commanded a company in the Arab-Israeli War of 1948 and rose through the ranks of the Israeli Defense Forces. By 1973, he was in charge of the Northern Command and saw the Syrian army beginning to build up its forces along the Golan Heights, a move which turned out to be a precursor to the Yom Kippur War. At the time, Hofi's fellow members of the General Staff did not believe a war was imminent. Abraham Rabinovich wrote a book on the Yom Kippur War. He says General Hofi used a routine meeting called to discuss acquiring American aircraft to share his intelligence.
He happened to be the first called upon to speak, and he asked if he could depart from the agenda to make one observation. He said the Syrians were massed opposite him and could attack without warning, and he did not believe he would be able to hold them unless he was substantially reinforced. He made that statement and then got down to the airplanes. The conversation then went around the table. None of the other generals related to what he had said about the Syrians. And the meeting would have ended there had not Defense Minister Moshe Dayan been in attendance. And he said, wait a minute. You all heard what Hofi said. Either it's nonsense, or if it holds water, we've got to do something.
After much discussion, the General Staff finally agreed to send a second tank brigade to reinforce General Hofi's position at the Golan Heights.
Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. Israel's border troops, below strength during the holiday, came under surprise attack by Syrian and Egyptian forces 10 times greater than their own.
And how crucial was that second brigade in the operation that then took place against the Syrian attack?
Absolutely crucial. Because during the night, the Syrians broke through in the southern Golan, which was being defended by the original brigade, which was shattered. There were 400 Syrian tanks that broke through, maybe 30 Israeli tanks still in the fight. But on the northern front, 7th Division, the newly arrived division, held.
I believe it's a battle that's now taught in military academies.
It is indeed. Because of that, they prevented the Syrians from reaching the Jordan River.
For a brief period after the war, General Hofi served as Chief of Staff before resigning from the army and being appointed as head of the intelligence service Mossad. In 1976, they faced a significant challenge when hijackers took a plane carrying 94 Israeli citizens and forced it to land at Entebbe Airport in Uganda.
The Israelis are frustrated and resigned. Frustrated because there's nothing they can do to influence the situation except give in to the hijackers, and resigned to doing just that.
But behind the scenes, General Hofi was far from resigned. As the pro-Palestinian militants threatened to kill the Israeli hostages, Hofi decided to launch a daring rescue operation. The author Gordon Thomas interviewed Hofi for his book on Mossad. He says the general sought permission for the raid from the Israeli cabinet.
I have his words, which he gave me. He said, I told the cabinet, if we let our people die, it'll open the floodgates. No Jew will be safe anywhere. Hitler would have won a victory from the grave. And, of course, the Prime Minister at the time, Rabin, said, OK, we do it.
When the first aircraft landed, the tail lowered and Israeli commandos in 3 jeeps, the spearhead of the force, drove out and sped to the building where the hostages were being held, firing as they went.
According to Gordon Thomas, General Hofi was also responsible for pursuing the policy of sending out hit squads to different countries to assassinate people who Israel saw as terrorists. They started with the members of the Black September group, responsible for killing 11 Israeli athletes at the 1972 Munich Olympics.
He said, we have to take these people out. He did actually carry out a lot of assassinations have been carried out by that team. He also introduced a rule. Every assassination, before it was carried out, had to be signed off by the Prime Minister of the day. And that was very important. We are not putting our people out there to be accused of murder. We are not committing murder. I remember him telling me that more than once.
But a lot of other people thought that they were committing murder and that they were breaking international law. What did he say when you put that point to him?
He said, these people are a threat. They have committed crimes against us. They have tried to kill us. And they cannot be allowed to go free. He was very adamant about this.
June 1981. 8 fighter jets are spotted in the skies over Baghdad, preparing to attack. Their target, the pride and joy of Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein.
And that pride and joy was a nuclear reactor which Iraq had bought from the French government. Although both Saddam Hussein and the French insisted that the reactor was for peaceful scientific purposes, the Israelis were suspicious and launched an airstrike which badly damaged the facility, killing 10 Iraqi soldiers and 1 French civilian.
There were those who said, if we destroy this new reactor, we'll absolutely turn the whole of the world against Israel. And he said, yes, okay, I understand what you're saying. And then he called another meeting and he said, we're going to do it. It was quite successful. They did destroy it.
But there would have been a big international reaction to that.
There was a huge international reaction to it, as you probably will remember.
His view was that operations like this were essential to the security of Israel.
Absolutely.
That wasn't the view shared by everybody in Israel, even,
No,
was it?
it wasn't. You're quite right. It was not shared by everybody in Israel. In fact, far from it. More than once he had problems like that, where people said, what are Mossad's doing now? What do they think he's up to now? And this led to newspapers in Israel attacking him and so on. He lived with that. I remember it was like he said, you live with this.
What's been reaction in Israel to news of his death?
A sadness. He was not a very public personality, so you can't say he was sort of mourned for his personality. He hardly ever gave newspaper interviews. You rarely ever saw him on television, a modest man, and he turned out to be a great leader of the Mossad.
We're in close tonight with Martin Perl, who died recently at the age of 87, nice Jewish boy from Brooklyn, James Madison High School. Dr. Perl shared the 1985 Nobel Prize in Physics with Dr. Frederick Rains. Dr. Perl discovered the tau lepton, a subatomic particle. Dr. Rains discovered the neutrino. I don't understand too much of this particle physics, but here is Dr. Perl talking about scientific education.
I've been in science and engineering education for a long time, and I think there's another direction in which the whole world should be going. A number of things have happened. Every engineering field, and every scientific field, and every medical field has gotten more and more elaborate, more and more to know, and things change faster and faster. General university reaction to that, at least in places like Stanford, has been to increase the number of courses that the students take and to push everything down. So the students we select mostly are, well, if they've taken calculus in high school and advanced placement, in our case in physics, yes, that's what we like. So they come into bachelor's degrees, into the bachelor program already knowing calculus, quantum mechanics, and some of them before they get their bachelor's degree or else field theory, and then when they move into graduate school, they start specializing in cosmology or string theory or various experimental fields. And that is just wrong. The way that we should be teaching is giving students less to do and more time to enjoy life and to think, because the world changes too fast. And as they want to learn new things or go into new fields, they should do it as they're going on. You cannot prepare for history. So I think is to offer them this other way of studying in which the requirements are lower. There's much more emphasis on laboratory work, not on the kind of laboratories where you have to get the right answer when you measure gravitational acceleration, but those in which you can fool with equipment. So the idea is to reduce the regular program to let students just study easily, dream, do other things, think about other fields while they're doing their primary engineering or science field. These will be, in the end, more productive students. It does two things. For students that are having more trouble, it eases them into these scientific fields with less pressure, and they can catch up. And for the good students, they will get more creative and they will dream more. And I think that it's also a very useful thing for third world students. A particular problem in the third world is that students are always trained following an English style or a French style, and those are both wrong. We're simply over-educating our students now, overstuffing their brains, and they have no room to dream, no room to think, no room to be creative.
Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Taps. Martin Perl studied with the great physicist Isidore Rabi. He studied with Donald Glaser, invented the bubble chamber, whose podcast we've done, and then he settled at Stanford for 45 years. Here he talks about the importance of education to his family in Brooklyn.
Your parents were very keen to impress upon you the value of education, you've written.
Yeah. It was education, two components, but a little bit of the Jewish tradition is education, so you can properly be religious. But the major part for them was to be educated, so you could make a good living.
Well, Nobel Prize is a pretty good living, but here's another nice Jewish boy from Brooklyn, Neil Diamond, who wasn't quite as good a student. My favorite Neil Diamond song, Brooklyn Roads.
When you come to school, there's a sit there softly crying. Teacher say he's just not trying. Got a good head and he don't lying, but you know yourself. It's always somewhere else. Stood by my window and looked out on the road. Brooklyn Roads.